Hello, everyone. I want to welcome you for our webinar for today. We're gonna hold for about 1 more minute, allow for more people to join this webinar, and we'll get started. Fantastic. I can see more people are joining us. A couple more seconds, and we'll get started. So, hello, everyone. It's nice to see you here. It's nice to be here with Amit. My name is Boaz Barzel. I'm the field CTO at OX Security, and I'm here with Amit Sheps. Amit, do you want to present yourself?
Amit Sheps, Head of Product Marketing. Let's go into the introduction slide.
Yes.
Yeah.
Fantastic. And welcome to our webinar. This is a joint webinar between OX and CyCognito. We're going to bring you something really interesting, something that really will connect a lot of the aspects of how you're looking at exposure from multiple levels. And myself, I've been with OX Security for the past 3 years, multiple positions before it from Cato Networks and a decade at Checkpoints, different types of positions. And the idea really, and what I'm hoping to bring to you is an understanding of how you're looking at your application exposure from multiple angles and how Aux, of course, and CyCognito help you both together to understand the entire exposure, to understand the risk, and to mitigate it. Amit, do you want to continue?
Yeah. My name is Amit Sheps. As we just said, I'm the Head of Product Marketing at CyCognito. I think 3 months. But coming from secure experience, both in OT security and cloud security. So I think it wraps up the, so to say, internal view rather and enriching the external view. I think what we would like to show here is that the external, where it comes together with the internal views, whether it's, so to say, the attacker view meeting the application, when it comes together, it brings a lot of value. So can we move to the next slide, Boaz?
Yes.
So let's start with the introduction of who is CyCognito. CyCognito put a target to itself actually to bring the attacker view or the external view of organization and secure it to the security landscape. That means that we identify the external attack surface. Organizations are know very well how to do the internal attack surface, as I mentioned before, but the challenge becomes the external. We are bringing the attacker view, where we like to call it the path of least resistance, where they can actually find all that attack path. And in the end of the day, organizations call it the unknown unknowns. So in the end of the day, there is a portion of your assets that you're not aware of and you don't know about, so it creates blind spots. How we are doing it, we are very unique in our approach. We don't need anything but the organization name, domain, and from that point on, we will know what to do, whether it's to discover the digital footprint, the assets, the subsidiaries, the brands. So in the end of the day, we don't work with IP ranges. We work with your domain names. And in the end of the day, what we will do is on top of the discovery, we will also do testing, whether it's dust, whether it's auto pen testing. And by doing that, we are also providing another level of validation of and exploitability on top of the discovery. And of course, connecting it with business context. So we are providing the visibility, the validation, and of course, the context, which will allow you to prioritize. We are fortunate enough to have 20 of the 100 Fortune 100. You can see the logos on this, which are very impressive. And let's go to actually the problem definition as we want to have it today.
Thank you, Amit. And I think that this is from the discussions that we have previously before the webinar. One of the things that really came out the most, and what I see about CyCognito as well, is really the broad aspects and the capabilities and what you're able to do, not just the scanning or the autonomous scanning, but the actual exposure of risk and different items from this perspective, which again leads me to the understanding of the attack surface that's continuously changed. I know that you'll have questions. Please feel free to write them in the Q&A. This is really important. Also in the chat, feel free to kind of talk with us in the chat. And as we're talking about the attack surface constantly changing, we're looking from the AppSec or from the internal view. There's multiple types of aspects or multiple types of risks that we started to see that are exploding now, or the inflection point in 2025, where the first one is really about AI generated code. AI generated code, we all know it's a functional code. Between it and security, there is a long, long distance. The things that we've saw and what we've seen beside developers are using AI, so they're developing more lines of code, not necessarily more vulnerabilities per line of code, but more lines of code means more vulnerabilities, means that we're going to start seeing, especially next year, backlogs will start exploding. So if today we're handling about 570,000 issues across the pipeline, now we're going to multiply it by 5, 10, 100, depending on how many developers and the usage, of course, of AI. Where from a speed mismatch, we're also seeing attackers using AI. It takes about 15 minutes and less than $1 to exploit a new vulnerability, which means that we have developers on one hand are using AI for development purposes. Attackers, on the other hand, are using that for attack purposes. And then security is kind of stuck in the middle, still working with people, still trying to understand how to best secure, how to best use the AI, where both sides of the equation that we're trying to react to are now being kind of moving faster than we do.
So on the other side of the equation, we have the exposure. So the AI code actually brings fluctuation, or what we call attack surface fluctuation. The time that you need today in order to launch an application is hours in some cases, and therefore you will see much more changes in your attack surface. It's much harder to monitor and detect changes in your attack surface when you have all the vibe codings and all that stuff around. As was mentioned, increasing sophistication. We can see the attackers are being more and more sophisticated, again, as was mentioned, using AI. And what we also see is security control gaps. So in some cases, you think that your attack surface is in a specific situation, and maybe new vulnerabilities popped out, new assets were initiated in place which are out of governance. And of course, monitoring your attack surface and validate that your controls are in place is also a big issue. So the exposure is also experiencing challenges because of all of these changes.
This is also true, by the way, Amit. When I was kind of playing between the integration between the platform, one of the things that I noticed, and it really corresponds well with different types of attacks that I've seen right now, like the Shai Hulud in the past recent days, or the one we talked about previously of the Anthropic AI, is the interesting thing is that even when I'm developing and releasing what we call secure software today, it's still something that, it secures now, but tomorrow or even in a few hours, there's a lot of fluctuation as you're experiencing or as you're explaining right now, which really makes it very hard to understand the exposure from one side or another. So this is why we need to look at application, and we titled it, from code to exposure and back again, of course, Lord of the Rings, but I'll put it aside, is that the fact that we have to understand both sides of the application, how it became an application, how it was developed, but then from the other side, what's happening right now, what's changes, and everything that's happening from the attack surface perspective, from the risk assessment perspective, from new attacks that are increasing in sophistication.
And you also need to take in consideration that now cycles are much shorter. So
Yes,
if in the past you had days to launch an application and you took the time to do security reviews and all that stuff, today the application is out immediately. So you don't have the chance to actually evaluate. I assume that there will be SAS tests, but in most cases it's out and you don't know if you're exposed to either CVEs or any other types of attacks.
exactly. And before we continue, and Amit will share with us a bit more details, I'd like to mention that after the few slides that we have here, we're going to jump into a demonstration because we really want to show you how we can solve this specific problem and an additional problems that are derived from this.
So this is a slide which capture the market as we see it after discussing it with the vast our customers, whether it's large organization or small startups. So what we can see we discussed about whether it's the external exposure and now becomes exposure management. And what we see is that we have few categories. So and customers or organizations are struggling to actually meet these KPIs, mainly because it's not there yet. It's not implemented. The programs are not in place. So the first one is the visibility. Most of our customers that we talk with, when before they have CyCognito, are struggling with to see actually which are assets are exposed, or to actually identify their, so to say, digital footprint, and identify which assets actually exposed to the internet. Um, Most of them are succeeding to go up to 50%. Many of them getting a much lower number. Now, when an organization get to the maturity that you can actually have the visibility, the next phase will be actually try and validate and try to do some more active validation, and then comes the pen test, the penetration testing, and the dust. And what we can see is that most of the organization are doing it very low, on very low portions of the attack surface. And the cadence is also being done annually, or let's say twice a year max, which actually yields an MTTR, or the response times are very long. And of course, you don't have the updated picture all the time because, as we just said, it's a moving target. With
Mhm.
CyCognito, we can actually take customers to 100% visibility, covering 100% of their attack surface with actually automatic test and the pen testing tests. Whether the cadence are, I don't want to say immediate, but daily and weekly, which can reduce the MTTRs, the response times, to some cases days or hours. So having an exposure management or ESM tool in your organization actually creates or brings to much more secured attack surface.
Fantastic. That's really, really interesting because, when we discussing attack surface in that sense, the main problem that I usually see with customers, and you're addressing the visibility aspect, is that they do have kind of their top assets covered, but there's a lot more assets and it's constantly changing even from the internal perspective, where if we're going to look at the kind of cycle that something is created, it always starts from code creation. So when we start with code creation, we have multiple types of detections. The detection are usually done after the fact. And from that perspective, there is the process of prioritization, where what we're seeing is that it becomes extremely difficult. The reason it becomes extremely difficult is if we look at it from an internal perspective, then I don't really understand always what will be happening later on. And of course, from that perspective, when I'm trying to respond to items, I need to also understand from development perspective how what will be the best response, how am I working with development best, and then comes the hard part. When we're trying to remediate issues, we always try to come in and say, this is what needs to be fixed. Or sometimes we see lists upon lists that are being sent to development and they're trying to make sense out of everything. And then we need to get them to prioritize security issues rather than their own task, which is something that usually is very difficult. And from that perspective, a security team always have to ensure validation. The first validation is in the deploy or the development itself. So when we're creating the new code, we need to validate that new code is actually fixing the issue. But then after deployment, we need to ensure, and this is where it starts coming together from a solution perspective, we need to understand that we're actually reducing the risk, we're actually reducing the exposure. And I think this is where one of the points where it comes from a very, very strong position is that I can do the validation and the detection in code and before deployment. And when things changes and everything that's happening right now from a risk and exposure perspective, and then when I see the entire picture, then it's easier for me to understand that first of all, I'm making fixes, I'm making remediation efforts that are being deployed, and then I can prove that I'm reducing risk and I'm reducing exposure. To take it a step further, and this is what we're seeing today as we're using AI attacks or AI assistant coding in that sense, we can start enabling developers to get the security context in their own tools, which means that by connecting, for example, to OX, the AI assistant coding receives all the security context for every request, which means that a developer is now even copying paste from the tickets or writing to the AI assistant, build me a log aggregator and a new API endpoint to query it. The first thing that happens is that that context or that request goes to, in this case, OX, understand everything from the OX perspective, and then replies it back into the context of the AI. The AI used that for the development with all the security best practices and policies and KPIs in that sense, which enables the reduction of creation of security issues, which means we're able to prevent vulnerabilities from ever being created from code. That's not enough, of course. And this is where, when we're looking at the entire process, is we're able to provide also assurances and understanding of what's happening from that perspective. So as we're going and talking about kind of the solution from that perspective, is we're seeing that there's actually two sides, and this is where OX and CyCognito complements. And Amit, let's talk about it from the CyCognito approach and kind of the outside in discovery and validation. Let's start from the exposure side and then maybe go from the internal side.
Yeah, so before going into the weeds, I didn't want to interrupt. So I think we hear the word validation in many cases in the exposure side. So there are two types of validation. You touched one of them, which is, I think, the most important one on the code side, is actually validate that we solve the problem on the code side. But in some cases, what CyCognito also provides is the validation that it's can be exploitable from the outside. And having this validation in many cases is a feed for your prioritization. Because if it's an issue that I cannot, so to say, exploit from the outside, maybe it should not prioritize as the most important one, even though it's have a critical CVSS. So just as a side note, in some cases we see critical CVSS scores which cannot be exploited from the outside. However, you can have a high CVSS score which can be exploited, and it's tied to a very important asset. So and the business implications are very high. So just as a side note. So going to the exposure side, of course, the outside in discovery and validation. So we always um, looking for new assets, continuous discovery, continuous exposure, monitoring, attack surface management, all of these words. We always on the mission to find those new assets to give you that full picture of your attack surface, whether it's your main headquarter, subsidiaries, their subsidiaries, and so on and so forth. On top of that, of course, as I said, validation. So we need to, I mean, we enumerate all the risks. Now we need to validate that it's actually exploitable, and therefore this is the real risk that you should chase. And of course, security controls validation, whether it's WAFs, whether it's anything that you have in place, you need to make sure that we are covering, you know what you are covering and you know what you are missing. So if you have a WAF, if you have a new vulnerabilities, new assets are popping, you need to have them in place. And this is with the continuous discovery, this is what CyCognito will do for you. Boss, to the upside.
Yes, and really from the other side, and when we're going back to code, the first thing that we want to do is we want to start prevent vulnerabilities at creation. There's a lot that can be done today, specifically with AI assistant coding, but even before we're releasing something, one of the really great things that we're providing to our customers is their ability to understand the idea of code to runtime. So even from the code perspective, we are able to say what will happen when the application will be in production, which means that it allows us to better understand everything before it's actually getting released and provide an organization specific context that then can be delivered directly to the AI assistant coding. From that perspective, the connection between security and development is always something that's relatively difficult, especially the collaboration. And one of the items that I think that are super important is how do I take all of the security context and the security understanding and really get developers to start adopting it, to start understanding it from the fact that there is a security issue, but what do I need to do for remediation? How can I prove that this security issue is actually an issue for me, both from before the deployment, and of course, if something is already deployed, what can I say about it? What other mitigations and controls needs to be done, and how can I reprioritize the issue based on the context of what's happening from the code to the cloud or the code to runtime, and then from the external attack path, and create a remediation that can scale with the AI development. And I think this is one of the main aspects here, and what we'll also show in the demonstration is that eventually, as we're moving further along and as we're embracing more technologies and modern development, we understand that release cycles are becoming extremely short, that we have more and more and more tasks at hand, and we need to understand that the remediation or what we need to do has to scale with the entire business operation. Otherwise, at some point, we're going to either lose control or we're not going to meet the same pace as the business demands for us. And before we actually move forward, I see that we have multiple questions, and maybe we'll, Amit, maybe we'll take a question or two right now before the demo.
Yeah, sure.
Um, okay, so from that perspective, let's start with the first one. So, when development speeds increase, what are the most common exposure blind spot you're seeing, especially outside the perimeter?
I think the first one is that um, the unknown unknowns. So you know that you have applications, you know that you have, I don't know, this is your production, this is your service, and some cases let's say the old legends, or what everybody is talking about, is that marketing decided to launch something and then you have a new application that nobody is aware of. So I think this is, I don't want to say this is where the danger lies, but I think this is when we see customers that are surprised by the amount that what they think they have and what they actually had. And this is, I think, when we are coming to POVs, talking with potential customers, you can see that sometimes the difference between what they think and the reality sometimes is, I don't want to say crucial, I don't say tough words, but there is a gap over there.
That's very good. And I think that this brings us maybe to the demo part. And maybe Amit, following, the answer, maybe you'll take kind of control
Will
and
do.
let's show it.
Let's show it. Let's bring it on.
Yeah.
So I will open the demo and I will share my screen. So this is CyCognito. So the first thing that you'll see as a user, or we will show you, is of course the assets that you have. All that external attack surface, whether it's by risks, whether it's by assets, of course the security grade, and the deviation or the amount of information that we can provide is across countries. And again, it depends how you wish to have it, whether it's by issues, whether it's by geographical types, and of course, by how assets are being classified. So as you can see, there is you have here a very big amount of information. One additional thing is, of course, how the attacker can see your attack surface. Viewing your organization via the attacker lens, and it will be here in seconds. So what we are doing is we're actually taking all the attack path from the outside, and what you will see in a second is that this is all the ways or all the options that attacker, if he chooses to, can actually attack your organization. So we started with a very high level, and now the next phase will actually, let's see how we can actually managing all these visibility and attack surface issues. So the first one is that we want to see is that we have an attack surface data. I will go to our API dashboard to show you, this is the API we identified, okay? So we also have a web application visibility, as you can see here. But let's talk about the APIs that your application is exposing, applications are exposing. And let's assume that over here there are too many, and I want to focus on this one. So I will click, and now what I'll get is the list of all the APIs that the specific organization within my enterprise is exposing. And I'll see that over here I have 4 highs and I want to investigate it. So what I'll do is I'll check it over here. And what we can see over here is that we have a discovery path. So on the discovery path, what we can see is how we actually identify that this asset, this application belongs to the organization. Since we are dealing with external attack surface, and in some cases you have hosted sites, you have sites that may or may not will include your enterprise name or a brand name within the URL, you need to have a certification, some of evidence that this is actually your asset and you are not chasing false positive. So over here you can see that it started with the large organization and went to the small organization, and over here we can actually trace the who is record, and again going again, and this is an IP that we traced. In the end of the day, the assets in a very high probability belong to the organization. So what we can also say about these assets, first, the web page is exposes. So what you can see over here, that this is a login page. So again, we found the login page, but which by definition are considered as, let's say, a more sensitive pages. And if we look on the asset details, what we can see also over here is that actually what services and what application it runs. If we will go over here, it will be more detailed in technical data. What I also want to show you is that, okay, so let's try to have a little more investigation and see what are the issues. So we can see that it is vulnerable. It has to high vulnerabilities. And it also can be exploited by cross-scripting attack. So you can see that we engaged vulnerabilities into visibility. We took visibility and we actually combined it with visibility, with vulnerabilities, and we provide business context. And now you can actually prioritize and understand what to do with all this information. If it's, again, you can measure the business impact and remediate. If we will flip it around, so now what we will do is we will go and look about the risks. So in some cases, application issues or attacks are not being driven by CVEs, but other stuff, whether it's misconfiguration or other types of attacks. What CyCognito is doing is monitoring, of course, the OWASP top 10 application for web apps. So over here, we have a list of risks. So for instance, let's take the injection part, and we will get all the risks that we found, which indicate cross-scripting. So over here, if I will go into this risk, what I'll do is I mapped a risk into an asset. So this is the risk that we found, and this is the exposed asset. Again, what we are showing is exactly how we discover it. By the way, this is how, again, the attacker will find it. So you can look at it as a reconnaissance of an attacker, providing all the asset details. And if we will go over here, what we will get is the actual data of the assets. And from now on, we can actually manage it as we wish. Now, if we can open again the issues which are being done or being identified on this asset, what we can see again is the cross scripting. And for instance, there is a plain text authentication. So we found actually two types of problems within these assets, which again, given the business context, will provide all the data for prioritization. What we also showing is, of course, the discoverability and the attractiveness. So you have something which can be discovered, so to say, in a moderate way, but attackers are looking for it. So again, this is another way or another dimensions to prioritize or assess the real risk. This was, I think, it's very hard to show all the use cases and all the things that this system contains. However, two things I want to touch in the end is, for instance, we talked about controls and security control validation. So over here, we can show you which one of your application is being protected by WAF, and if you have applications which are outside of the WAF. So this is one thing that you should be aware as well. Compliance, we can also monitor compliance. So there are some regulations which has implication on external validation. And the last one, but not least, is of course remediation tracking. In the end of the day, what you would like to do is actually first to see that what you're doing impacts your risk scoring, impact your organization risk, and of course, report to your board, report to your management, what are the outcomes of all the actions. So in a glance, that was CyCognito, and I will give back the screen for you back, Boaz.
Thank you, Amit. Very, very good. Very in-depth understanding of how your system is built. And what I'd like to do is I'd like to take that and share my screen and really discuss about how I'm going to connect it together. There's also a question to align issues with CWEs that was created here. And one of the items, and I'll touch that as a second, one of the items and one of the capabilities of the integration between CyCognito and OX is that we are able to additionally enrich the data. For example, CWEs will also be part of the issue detail as part of the integration. So this is one of the areas. It's not just enriching the data and pulling in the data, but also understanding of other aspects. And then from that perspective, when we're building reports, for example, from the OX platform, we can see, for example, a report based on different CWEs that are coming both from the CyCognito side and the OX side, kind of consolidated together. And I'll show an example in a short while. Now, from that perspective, what I want to do is, as you're looking kind of at the OX dashboard, the first thing is our ability to provide a map from the entire pipeline. And that includes the integration. So I can already see here the CyCognito integration as part of my entire pipeline. Of course, in this environment, I connected less areas of code, and there's a lot that comes from different areas from the CyCognito aspect. And this is really important because it gives us a good understanding when we're looking at all the different issues. We can either prioritize based on the relevancy or the criticality. We understand that even though there's a lot of issues that are detected from across the pipeline, not everything is a real issue, and this is where the integration also comes into place. We can help a lot of the team focus on the actual critical issues for them from the entire environment, and then help them monitor SLAs, build no-code workflows, for example. In that no-code workflows, I can come here and, for example, build a no-code workflows. Let's do a test. And this is the idea, which I can use any policy. But after I use any policy as a condition, there are multiple conditions that I can use, including conditions that are coming from CyCognito. So the easiest one probably will be from a source tool perspective. As I'm choosing the source tool, I can choose where they put it. Of course, I can choose multiple tools and everything that's kind of connected, including the OX tooling from that perspective. So I can choose any kind of tools that are connected to my system, and I can choose, for example, dynamic application security. And from here, I can choose an action, for example, to send an email or to create webhooks or open PRs when it is applicable. From the integration perspective, I can view all of my application and resources, everything that's coming from OX, from the cloud, and from external resources. So I'm able to monitor everything that not just coming and I'm connected internally, but let's say I've been running different types of operations, I'm running different types of business units, and then it allows me to also focus on different types of specific business units where I'm able to understand different types of issues. If there are critical issues in a single application, I can provide it, and I can provide it a business priority. With applications that I've already have, they are connected together, and then we can see it as a single application really from the code until the cloud. From an issues perspective, then we can monitor multiple issues that are coming from different resources. And for example, we can take the Citrix here. This is coming directly from CyCognito. We understand the context of the issues. We understand vulnerabilities. And here, OX really helps to understand if, for example, a public exploit is available or unavailable. And it helps to understand, for example, additional information on how to understand the vulnerability itself within the context of our environment, within everything that we're doing, including additional information. And we mentioned CWEs. We're also adding enrichment, including CWEs, into that same context, which means that we're going to bring a lot more context together and the ability to manage multiple aspects from the development perspective and from the external exposure, as Amit demonstrated. When we're talking about a code issue, we can see the issue in multiple aspects. We can see the different types of vulnerabilities and the different levels of context. This can be done before the actual deployment. And after the deployment, we can understand it from the exposure or from the DAST or agentic pen testing perspective. The entirety of everything allows us to manage all of our critical issues from multiple areas together, and then finally report on that. There's multiple types of report, from the ability to assign SLAs and understand the SLAs across the environment, what are due, overdue, see the different types of issues coming from multiple areas. And of course, from an active issues report, we can understand the different active issues, understand, for example, how they're coming in from multiple areas, even that coming from the dynamic app, for example, understanding what I have from an active issue perspective, both from an internal perspective, from let's say open source or code security aspects and the relevant information, but also coming in from CyCognito, understanding my active issues, monitoring that, and eventually monitoring other aspects. For example, we can build a custom report that monitors multiple aspects. And finally, really executive reports where I can define and build business units and include in those business units the information that comes from the external attack path aspects. So as we've seen, there's multiple items that we're seeing here that the integration between CyCognito and OX can provide you both from a reporting perspective, visibility perspective, operational perspective, and really the ability from a CyCognito perspective, as Amit mentioned it, not just to create visibility on what you want to scan, but an understanding of your entire exposure, your entire attack landscape, I would say. And there's actually a question coming to from the audience in that sense, Amit, is how should organization adapt their external attack surface management strategy to account for vibe coding? They wrote fast, agile, perhaps maybe loosely governed code changes. From that perspective, you want to take this one?
Yeah, we have another one afterwards. I'll take one and you'll do the other one.
Okay.
I think it, as you mentioned, it is exactly as you show in this great demo. I think when you are launching an application using vibe coding, all these processes actually didn't happen. So you have an application now out in the wild without all these security measures, without taking security in consideration, which means that either you're exposing something, you missed something, and this puts you in danger. So I think this is the, I don't want to say vibe coding is amazing, but I think you need to treat it with cautious. This is, I think, the main issues that we see. Now, additional question that popped up is, what is the biggest misconception organization have about exposure that originate in the build pipeline or supply chain?
That's a good question. So, really, from that perspective, what I think is that the first thing that comes up is the latest Chai Hulud attack, where we're using a lot of open source, and it keeps on changing and keeps on evolving, I would say. And the reliance on that open source, specifically around the supply chain, and as we're building everything, it means that when we're starting to use packages, the first thing we don't want to start using malicious packages or getting compromised packages within our development. But at the same time, I would say as we are running our application, and if it is discovered that we have a problem with one of the packages, I think from that perspective, first of all, understand the traceability, where it is in code, what do I need to do, how do I need to fix it. But then from an exposure perspective is to understand where am I exposed. So kind of connecting both sides together, I think that's a great example for kind of the power of our joint solution is on one hand to immediately understand what I need to do in order to remediate. On the other hand, I know exactly the exposure, the risk I'm at, and kind of combining those two together, there's a plan of action. I know what to do, who needs to do it, and also as you're seeing from a WAF perspective or other types of mitigations, what are the mitigations and control I can do in the meantime until we get it fixed, until we get it tested, until we get a new version running without that issue, I would say.
And by the way, one of the things that we can bring to the table is that you mentioned Shah Hulud, and I mean, in some cases, it will happen in some environments that I have, and maybe attackers cannot actually exploit it. So yes, you should fix it. But if it's not exploitable from the outside, if it's not something that an attacker will reach, maybe not today, maybe tomorrow. So it brings you more sense into the prioritization stuff, to the prioritization logic.
Yeah. And I think this is a good point around the prioritization logic because I still see a lot of companies having a hard time prioritize vulnerabilities, as simple as that. And they always seem to lack context and lack information. And there is no single tool out there that can bring you all the context and all the information. And if you have to, from a strategic perspective, choose wisely, you have to choose systems that are able to complement each other, to work together, and create a joint solution that can provide that extra level or the synergy, if you want, from that perspective.
There was one additional question, but I think we just answered it, is can you share an example where a small pipeline or code issue turned into a major exposure? And I think this is the Shai Hulud, or we found another ones maybe, or this is the main.
So Shai Hulud actually has two waves. This was the second wave, and I'm pretty sure we're gonna see a third wave. In Hebrew we say that third time ice cream because it comes from English, third
Yeah.
time ice cream. So we talked about it and said, okay, it's ice cream. So every three times that something happens, we share ice cream together. But from that perspective, this is something that we'll see as an ongoing, I would say, an increase in the software supply chain, increase in sophistication, as you mentioned before, and something that there is no possible way to predict what will happen. We can't stop developing. We're not going to stop using open source from that perspective. So we have to be ready. We have to be agile enough to say that, okay, there is a malicious package. This is where it is. This is what I need to do. I need to fix it. I need to prevent it. But on the other hand, I need to understand the exposure. I need to understand the risk that's coming from it. And if I can mitigate the type of attack, how do I mitigate it? How do I prevent it from getting increased or on my expense, getting additional breach aspects?
Before we are wrapping up,
Yeah.
we were so convenient and we'll show. I mean, can you explain what Shai Hulud is to the audience? Because I don't know if anybody, all the audience actually knows what it is.
Yeah, so it's very hard to ignore it. Shai Hulud, the second coming, it's a very sophisticated attack, actually. The attack comes from probably because we don't know who the attacker is exactly, but what we've noticed is, first of all, they take control over maintainer's account in NPM. And then once they take control, they create new version or upgraded versions with their malicious code on packages that up until now were totally legit and everything. We've been working with them for many years now. What happens is that when the package is now running, so free running, for example, in a container, it will gather all of the credentials from the container and then it will create a GitHub account, a public GitHub account with all the secrets and tokens and all that information so everybody can see, including the attacker itself. By the way, an interesting thing from that perspective is if they are not able to create the account or to steal information, they're trying to destruct the system, so wipe out the data, which is really devastating from that perspective. And the important part here is that to understand that they're actually using a security tool, an open source security tool, to gather the secret. So even tools that are developed for the community to use for, let's say, scanning perspective, they can be also used into malicious. And this is one of the areas where the sophistication of the attack is kind of increased. By the way, it's self-replicating. So if it's in the one system, it replicates itself by copying its own code. It's not pulling something from the outside. It's copying out code and kind of replicating itself, which is really also an interesting. And if you search for an 18 characters randomized GitHub repositories and you find a description, you might find a description Shai Hulud with SHA-1. So if everybody knows what SHA-1, it's another way of the attacker to kind of poke at researcher and says, I know I'm stealing secrets, and SHA-1 is a hashing algorithm, and it plays with it. So we're talking to, I think, a group, a very smart and sophisticated group, and definitely not the last part of it.
Well,
Yeah.
it was great to be here with you.
Thank you. It was amazing. I really enjoyed it. Um,
I
and
don't see that we have more questions, so thank you for the audience, for all the participants, and see you in additional events.
Yes, thank you. It was a pleasure. And we'll see you on the next time.
Exactly. Bye bye.
Bye bye.